now that you've taken your photographs, part of the post-production part of this assignment is that you may want to do some editing to your photo online. Now, some people are like, the challenge is to have all these things all done naturally, like only doing them through the lens, taking the pictures without doing any editing. But there are lots of editing tools, and there's nothing wrong with actually doing any editing. Now, what I'm going to show you first is I need to talk about composition. Very briefly, we're not going to go into too much depth, but I'm going to show you what I mean by composition, and then I'm going to show you how cropping the picture and positioning your picture. In the next lesson, I'm going to go into more detail on how to log in to the online editing tool and some features for that. But right now, I just want you to understand the concept of it and how that works, because that should be one of the first stages that you do when you're editing your photo. So let's see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about composition. And in photography, there's tons of different sort of techniques that you can use to have a good composition. One of them is the rule of thirds. There's also the golden ratio. There's lots of other things, and there's things that we can go into depth with, but again, we don't have the time. But this is an important concept. So this is called the rule of thirds. And the way that your picture, I mean, this is good composition, not even just for photography, but even just, for a drawing or a painting, is this thing called a rule of thirds, where they have like a graph over top of your image. And the whole idea behind that is that where we position the main focus of something in a photograph goes by these guidelines that we have here. And it's supposed to be really naturally pleasing to the eye. And it talks about, images being balanced. So we have these lines here, and then it's divided into, 3 by 3. And the idea is that your main subject should be in accordance with some of these lines. This cat, for example, the cat is basically on that line here. It's balanced in the middle, in the center of this line. So it's balanced here, that there's a image here, and then there's lots of negative space here, and that's why it's asymmetrical. That's why it's pleasing to the eye. In terms of another way to use the rule of thirds, as opposed to having it on the main image on either this line here or this line here, is just having something right in the middle. So again, the focus, it doesn't have to be exactly in that square, but the weight or the focus of the picture is mostly taking up the middle of that grid. Another way is to, again, so this portrait here, so the subject matter is along that line here, but her eye is lined up where these two lines intersect. Again, that's something that's it's balanced, it's pleasing to the eye for us to look at. So if you have, again, from a far away picture, again, the focus where the faces are in that middle square. It doesn't have to be exactly in the middle. It's nice that it's to the right a little bit, but they're actually looking off to the side, which is great, but it's mostly in that middle square, which means it's really balanced. Okay, another example of the rule of thirds, where the subject matter, the little girl here, is pretty much on that line there, which balances everything else out. Okay, so that's pretty much how the rule of thirds work. Let me show you how that would work when we're editing stuff, because one of the first things that we should do is we should think about cropping our picture. I'm going to show you in the next lesson just the details about this online editing tool, but I just want to demonstrate how we can make some decisions about the rule of thirds. Now in this program, so again, we'll go into more detail, there's a crop canvas function, and actually it makes that rule of thirds grid for us. So as we can see, I'm working with a stock image, is that the focus of our portrait and her face is pretty much in the middle. So it does go by the rule of thirds. However, changing about where cropping the photo and readjusting this grid will send a different message about our image, right? And this is all about portraits and a story. So if I wanted to maybe focus on perhaps the rule of thirds, is I could play around with this, is that we're basically she's pretty much on that line here. Her one eye is lined up where those two intersect. So say I wanted to do that, I'm going to put apply. That gives a much different feeling, right? I'm kind of noticing the background perhaps a little bit more as opposed to her stare. So another thing that I can do, if I really, so again, when you are cropping this and moving it around, maybe I really want to focus more on her, a lot on her gaze. And it's okay if I cut off some of the head and some of the shoulders, right? Because some of this stuff is sort of balanced here. So maybe I want to focus on that. So let's see how that's different. This is very much a more intimate view, right, of her, of maybe the stare. Maybe I even want to go even more. All the decisions that I make about cropping it are definitely going to tell like a different story. Maybe I want to have both of her eyes lined up with that right there. Let's see how that looks. Right, so now I get a much closer view and just definitely different sort of look, right? So it's playing around with, depending on what your image is and how it looks. Maybe I really want to focus here. But really, depending on what your picture is and how you started off with, is going to dictate, cropping the image and changing the meaning of the story. Okay, so but one of the first things you want to do is you want to crop the image and adjust it, not willy-nilly, but according to that graph, that rule of thirds. So I'm going to show you in the next lesson how to get into this PicMonkey and how to use all the different features.